while unfortunately the gallery is closed here in Ireland, as in much of the world, we're in lockdown, we do have a situation where we've put everything virtual online. So if you go to www.butlergallery.com, you can have a fantastic 360 virtual tour of the exhibition and see what it looks like. And that will be a good intro if you haven't seen the film already. Today for the event, it's the kickoff event of the first of 7 that we're hosting over the next consecutive 7 Wednesdays. And today we're delighted to be joined and having our presence the creative directors of the movie, Tomm Moore and Ross Stewart, and they're in conversation with Will Collins, the screenwriter. And hosting the whole event and holding it all together is our MC, Mark Mullery. And Mark is the assistant director, of course, on the film. And Mark will be the feature of next week's talk. So he's not going to give too much away about his role today because we don't want to take away his limelight from that point of view. Just to say, you've joined us obviously in webinar format. So that means you can see the speakers, but they cannot see you, or you cannot see each other indeed. You can ask questions throughout the course of the event through the Q&A, and I will compile these as we go over the next 45 minutes or so, as the in-conversation will be, and we can put them to the speakers at the end. So I think at that point, I will hand over to Mark and let the event begin.
Thank you so much, Alan, and thank you to everybody who's joining us today. This could be a little haphazard because I stepped in at the last second. Cartoon Saloon's Anne Mulrooney was supposed to do this, but she's unable to. So unfortunately, you're going to be looking at 4 very similar looking and sounding male heads. But the positive side is that, as Alan said, I was the assistant director on WolfWalkers. So to an extent, I know where the bodies are buried. Maybe I can pull some gems out of the lads. But yeah, really happy to have Tomm, Ross, and Will here. And yeah, so let's get going. So guys, there are plenty of kind of stories. There's one certainly that you tell, Ross, about first coming up with WolfWalkers itself, about, you know, that actually coming from a seminar. And I think I would like to talk about that. But first, I think it's good to just get a sense of the kind of folklore behind all of this stuff. So Tomm, maybe starting with you, I mean, you have a particular interest in Irish folklore anyway. What is it you think that just makes it so kind of alive?
I think folklore and mythology in general is fascinating. And I think as a teenager, I started to realize that a lot of the pop culture that I loved, whether it was Star Wars or superhero comics, were actually borrowing from folklore and mythology. And that's when I discovered, when I was in Young Irish Filmmakers here in Kilkenny, Joseph Campbell's work. And so I kind of became fascinated with that. And then there's this kind of chain smoking thing that happens where we made Secret of Kells, and there was so much research into the folklore and history for Secret of Kells that led on into Song of the Sea, and then Song of the Sea kind of led on to the idea that we'd make a third film. So for me, it's sort of been a basis for a body of work over the last 20 years in these three movies, as well as other side projects and interests. It's just been a well that we've returned to again and again as a starting point for our projects, you know.
And the Joseph Campbell thing, for people who don't know who he is, can you explain a little bit? He was somebody who kind of said that there was this sort of unifying theme through so many kind of hero legends, right?
Yeah, what happened was Joseph Campbell, I think in the 50s and 60s, as an anthropologist, started to draw connections and started to talk about the idea of a monomyth. And I mean, as I've gotten more and more into this stuff, he's not a controversial figure, but he's not the only person with ideas in this realm. But for filmmakers and storytellers, it became a kind of a Bible for a while. Christopher Vogler wrote a book called The Writer's Journey, based on Campbell's idea that all these myths had similarities. And even if the myths were oral traditions with differences from culture to culture, there were fascinating characters and archetypes and journeys that were repeated over and over again. And he had a lot of different theories and a lot of different journeys that he spoke to. But I think the hero's journey was the one, because like George Lucas, Spielberg, those kind of people in the 70s latched onto that. And then the Disney studio in its renaissance in the 90s was discovering it. And that was when I was a teenager. So those were the movies of my kind of formative years. And seeing the connection, I remember the time that Superman died in the comics, and at the same time reading, you know, these kind of texts, whether it was Umberto Eco or Joseph Campbell or just the people and young Irish filmmakers chatting about it and going, whoa, like all these stories are connected, it's all the same, and wow, you know, Superman is a Christ figure and Rocky is a Christ figure and Luke Skywalker, and you know, these kind of things were really blowing my mind. And at the same time, there was a sense that Irish folklore wasn't really being represented. You know, it was like here and there, like we saw Luke Skywalker with his robotic hand was a bit like, you know, Nuada, yeah, sorry, thanks. And those type of things, we were seeing those connections, but it became a little bit of a mission or a little bit of an idea that when we set up Cartoon Saloon, that we'd like to kind of reinvent and reimagine those stories for, you know, for Irish kids and for Irish audiences as well as international, you know.
Cool. So to zoom in a little bit, I mean, I spent several years, whenever anyone would ask me, what am I working on? I would say an Oliver Cromwell werewolf movie. And I realized that most people just, most people just thought I was lying and just didn't follow up and just was like, okay, well, he's some kind of sociopath. But the reason I bring that up, Ross, to zoom in, the Wolves of Oscary is pretty close to home, actually, isn't it? Oscary was an old name for Kilkenny. So do you want to talk a little bit about that and a little bit about how you found these stories and what the stories were?
Yeah, Oscary is a name of an old kind of, I think, barnland or huge parish that encompassed parts of Kilkenny and parts of, I think, Carlow and Laois and that. But the Wolf People of Oscary was a folktale that Tomm had heard as a teenager from I think Angela and Young Irish Filmmakers, and it's not very well known around these parts. You know, it's not a very widely known folktale. You have to kind of go and search for tellings of it. Really, it wouldn't be widely known like Fionn McCool or Cuchulainn or any of those more popular folktales. So when 7 years ago, when Tomm and myself were doing the story workshop with Brenda Chapman, we went for lunch and we started batting around ideas for a feature film that we might make, and we were interested in, like, you know, what empathy and animal rights and speciesism and polarization and things like that, and we posited a kind of a question: what would it take for a hunter to have empathy with the prey that he was hunting? Because it's hard enough to foster empathy for people towards other people, but with speciesism, what would it take to foster empathy for a different species? And we kind of thought that if a child of a hunter became the prey, then that might force an empathy of sorts. And so we were thinking about, like, the changeling myth, which is similar to what with the Selkies in Song of the Sea, and also like a little bit of Aisling in Secret of Kells. It kind of seemed to fit with the other two films of this triptych. And Tomm remembered the Wolf People of Oscary, and what was really unique about it was that it wasn't a werewolf story so much. It was an alternative take, in that they didn't become monsters, they just became wolves, like normal wolves. And also there was a connection between the human body, which was asleep, and the wolf body. Like, anything that happened to one would happen to the other. So it immediately kind of became this story about almost like a soul connection between humans and the other species and the wolf. And also that the human mind would be in the wolf, so that they would sometimes protect people and they would guide people through forests. And so instead of it being a monster, it became almost like an apex predator that had the same intellect and maybe the same empathy as the human. So it was a really interesting take. And so when we started developing that, like around that lunchtime, it all seemed to gel together. And it was a little bit afterwards that we started thinking, well, to set it in the time of Oliver Cromwell's conquest would be perfect, because he came with a determined mission to wipe out the wolves in Ireland. And there was this huge, you know, conflict of societies around that time. So it just seemed a perfect place to find drama and to find conflict like that.
So, Will, we're obviously going to get in later in the talk, get into a little bit more of your process in writing this, but just in that, just talking about the kind of first ideas and the folklore that the lads are talking about, that must represent a tonal challenge, surely. But that like you're talking about Oliver Cromwell exterminating werewolves, everything like that. How do you balance that?
Oh well, it's actually very great because I actually haven't heard some of those stories before, and it conjured back to me when the lads approached me, they had like one-page outline, and I remember reading it and I just went, oh, this is a really cool, first of all, a very unique setting, and then to take the kind of angle into it of having these hunters coming over wiping out with the werewolves. I just went, oh, I was excited. I was immediately engaged because it was kind of it was screaming at me action. I was like going, okay, this is action. This is coming off of Song of the Sea, which was quite melancholic, and there was a lot of grief, and it was very blue. To go to this, there was an immediate sense of energy and adventure, but darkness as well. So darkness, I suppose to maybe give you an idea of the tone, the first kind of like impression of a tone that I had, or where my head went to, was darker. I was going, and I went quite dark to begin with. And to kind of to emphasize Ross's point about the actual myth, I'm from Cork, and I'd never heard the legend about the wolves of Oscary. It never came to me, so I was coming to it really completely fresh as well. So yeah, that's kind of my first impressions of the project when I came aboard.
And do you think that was a little bit of a necessary journey as a writer? Like, if your first impression of it is that this story is dark, do you have to pass through that moment by writing something, or can you quickly go, no, the tone is different, we're aiming this at a younger audience? What's the process there?
Oh, for me, if I have to, personally, I have to entertain whatever my instincts. I have to get it out of my system, and I just have to go all the way. And not necessarily, I suppose I don't think I have to write a draft now, but yeah, I have to walk down that path and then be able to kind of see, okay, what's the tonally, where can I bring it back, or how can we redress this, or keep the kind of balance the tone of the darkness with, and find the light basically to balance it out.
Yeah, cool. And so, right, the werewolves of Oscary, or the wolf people of Oscary, is probably quite an old legend as a backdrop, but the movie actually has a sort of historical setting, which is Kilkenny, roughly 1650, when Oliver Cromwell was garrisoned here. Was it, Tom, was it fairly obvious to you guys from the beginning that Oliver Cromwell was a sort of, or an Oliver Cromwell-like figure had to be a part of this story? It had to be Kilkenny, it had to be that time?
Definitely the Kilkenny part, because we grew up here. We were very conscious of the history that we were surrounded by growing up, and it was exciting. It was a little bit disappointing because we couldn't go on research trips to like Hawaii or something, but we didn't have to go very far for research trips. And I think Ross and myself had grown up, and if you go up to Kilkenny, you kind of, Oliver Cromwell is one of the big baddies in our history, and the local stories and stuff, and the whole Cromwellian thing where they put the horses in the Black Abbey and all of that kind of stuff was there. We were a long time calling him Cromwell, and in the end we backed away a bit and called him Lord Protector, and kind of made him more just like a spirit of that mindset, that kind of colonial Puritan mindset. And when we looked at Puritan sort of aesthetic and history and the woodblock prints and all, we were pretty excited about the visual possibilities and stuff fairly early on. I mean, this was like Ross and myself's opportunity to kind of apply a lot of ideas that we'd had in previous movies visually. And so the idea of the even the Puritan outfits when we first did the first concepts were really cool to see, that like harsh black and white in the colors. And, the more research you did, again, tone was the constant discussion on this. We had a pretty decent overall plot and idea, but the tone was the thing, because the more we got into this history and this time period and Cromwell and watching, movies set in that time period, was the Piano or Witch or, Cromwell, the movie itself, and that stuff, you could see it was a heavy adult story, and we did want to keep the tone much more focused on the young protagonists, much more focused on the kids. So that was probably our main thing going into it, that we kept on It felt like there was like one of those shopping trolleys with a wobbly wheel, and we'd be going straight down the track, and then we'd find ourselves off in some darkness about witchcraft or, you know, all of that kind of stuff, and we'd have to kind of force the trolley back towards the kind of tone that we wanted to have.
But as Will was saying though, we had to kind of fully develop or you know, like continue with those ideas until we got to the end and realized like, oh no, it's just way too dark. I mean, like the witchcraft thing, I think almost went to a full draft, didn't it, Will? Like we were talking about like Robin being threatened with being burnt as a witch rather than being put in the stocks, you know, and that was in there for quite a while.
Yeah, Robin definitely. It got very, very dark.
Yeah.
And there was I was just briefly talking before on the call. Sorry, before we were talking here, I remember writing the first treatment that I didn't send to the lads, where it got so dark that Robin, it ended up with Robin and Maeve standing over two freshly buried graves where both their parents died, and I just went, no, we can't do this. We can't do it.
There was another thing I remembered where we had Maeve's father was killed by Lord Protector, and his wolf skin was in the castle, remember? And Maeve had to try and go in and get this wolf skin and bring it back to the pack because they couldn't leave without this wolf skin. So Maeve went in, robbed the wolf skin, and went running off out of the town across the forest, and then Bill hops out and shoots her in the back.
You mean Robin?
That was Robin.
It was Robin.
That was
well,
Robin.
first off it was Maeve, and then it was Robin after. But I mean, we were entertaining this, and I think looking back at it now, what were we thinking?
You know, that's what I loved about the process, the development process, because no matter what we said, in my head there would be a little voice would say, that's too dark, and I would say it, and you would always go, you would always kind of go, well, entertain it, let's give it a go for a while.
Yeah, there was a good kind of blue sky thinking there for a good while, where, like, you know, anyone who posited an idea, you know, we'd at least entertain it for a couple of minutes, even if it was totally
I think we wandered around a bit when it was in the conceptual stage as well, because I do think there was, and it might happen in future saloon projects, but we talked about movies like Princess Mononoke, and increasingly, like, you're seeing animated movies going a little bit older, even if you're talking about Spider-Verse or How I Lost My Body. But we knew ultimately we wanted this to fit with the other two, which, as heavy as the themes are in Kells and Song, they are ultimately aimed at a younger audience, with adults as a secondary audience rather than adults first and kids as a secondary audience. So that was kind of the light that kind of brought us back. And I remember, Ross, you bringing up, because on Song of the Sea we had Into the West and My Neighbor Totoro as references, and at the beginning I definitely had Princess Mononoke as a reference, but Ross brought up exactly the kind of tone that we needed in a movie called Son of Rambo. And it was a movie by Garth Jennings, and like it's a surprising reference because it's a modern day movie, but it did have a little kind of Puritan goody child, little boy who meets a kind of bold boy, and their friendship is really special and it's really central to that whole story. And that was what we kind of hooked into. Even before we decided that Robin needed to be a girl, I think we knew that that friendship was going to have to be not Bill's back history in the Civil War and Lord Oliver Cromwell stuff. And even though all that stuff was fascinating, I think in our heart of hearts we knew that the friendship was going to have to be the central focus.
Well, let's talk about that friendship, because you just alluded to something there, which is you said before Robin was a girl. Do you want to explain what that means?
Yeah, in not so many of these concepts you can see, but Robin was a boy. In the first initial idea, we kind of had Bill and Robin as a kind of Batman and Robin team, and the idea that Robin was this like little trainee hunter and Bill and him were working together, and that he would change sides or see things from a different point of view after he met Maeve. And there was a lot of things not working with that, and I think there was natural conflict that we had to invent with a little boy that was much more naturally there with a little girl. And I feel like a lot of things clicked into place once we realized they needed to be a little girl. Also, there was a slight queasiness in me in that although I wanted the movie to feel like a part with the previous ones, we had done a little human boy meeting a magical girl twice already. So there was already just something exciting when the idea came up that we should make Robin a girl. But maybe the lads should speak more to that.
Well, yeah, I'm wondering, like, Will, did you do any? Did you try to write any drafts where Robin was a boy?
Oh, yeah.
Was that difficult?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So talk about
Oh,
that.
yeah. There was two drafts. The first two drafts, I think, Robin was a boy, and I always remember writing the first pages of the very, very first draft, and it was on the flight back from Toronto from the premiere of Song of the Sea. And I remember it was just, I'm a bit, I don't like writing in the room with people. And I remember just kind of looking around me and kind of going, everyone's asleep. I could just start writing this because it was in my head. And I remember being so excited and pumped about writing this, like, you know, action scene showing Robin and Bill working together out in the forest. And I was going full Samurai Jack on it, and I was going full Lone Wolf and Cub. And I was just like really pumped, and I just was so excited because the story got going from the get-go. Like, you know, Robin or Bill got bitten right in that opening sequence, I think. And I remember loving that and being really, really proud of that. But the problem started to happen after that. And I always felt Robin and Maeve's interactions just didn't feel right in a strange way. I did feel like we were repeating the dynamic in Secret of Kells, even though I didn't write that, but I just felt that energy was there. And after the second draft, I think we'd gotten the note from a couple of people. Like, it was literally just a small note. How about changing Robin to a girl? And I think it was the easiest note to take. We all agreed with it.
And even Nora, even Nora suggested, she was the only one who suggested the opposite, that maybe Maeve should be a little boy, and to make it really like Son of Rambo. I remember that too, but Elliot and a few other people that looked at it, that was the big turn it on its head kind of note that I think it immediately felt kind of exciting, because there's something about notes whenever they feel like, oh, I don't want to do that. And then there's notes where you go, oh, that's interesting, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It opened up so many possibilities and themes and everything, like it, especially seeing as everything was set in this Puritan society, you know, like if they were two boys, again, they would have had like ample opportunity to do all kinds of things, whereas two girls, they're immediately fighting against this cage of society, of religion, of everything, you know.
And I think even writing their scenes just felt much more in a weird way. I remember having Ross's reference of Son of Rambo was absolutely a great touchstone, but I also remember kind of calling on like my own friendships growing up as a kid, and I just found those natural parallels where I went, oh, this feels natural, like a pair of shoes that fit. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden it's strange, because all of a sudden, you know, it's very hard to contain an entire film in your head at one time. It's impossible. So it kind of dawns, a change like that dawns on you in segments where you kind of look at the beginning, you kind of go, okay, well, it's kind of a bit better there. And then you start kind of like, you start scanning through the film, kind of waiting for it to not fit. And I remember in my mind scanning through the film going, well, it kind of makes that bit a bit better, and this bit a bit better. It actually makes most of the film a whole lot better.
Yeah.
But we had one baby had to go out with the bathwater, and my own personal baby went out in the bathwater with changing it, and that was that opening sequence.
Yeah.
Of
we tried to keep it for a long time. I remember the other thing about making Robin a girl was that I never really felt great about the character, and we had him pretty much designed. And then I remember it was Inktober, and in Inktober you try and do an ink drawing every day. And one day I just kind of drew my wife as a kid, mixed with a bit of young Jane Goodall into the little boy's costume, and I posted it. And it's funny because I posted it speculatively, because it's just Inktober, just get an ink drawing up, and it got a lot of sort of reaction, and people thought it looked cool. And it was just something cool about the juxtaposition of that time period hunter costume on a little girl. It just was exciting. Like, there was something in it. I remember it just felt like kind of cool to see a little girl in that kind of an outfit.
Yeah, I don't think anything was lost. I mean, that's the thing. A lot was gained, and I don't think anything was lost from it, because so much of what you're just maybe isn't so important but seems cool is still there. She's still a hunter,
and I felt like I knew her.
I
felt like I knew her because she reminded me of like my wife and my sisters, and a lot of people that were young girls that, even in modern times, had to be quite fierce and determined in order to stand up to what was expected of them in society. So we started, as Ross said, speaking to another theme that seemed right with that mythology, which is very matriarchal. You know, a lot of the Irish mythology was very matriarchal. We already had Maeve, a bit of a nod at that, to Queen Maeve and stuff, and now Robin Goodfellow. And what was fun as well was that even the name didn't have to change. Like, we liked that Robin Goodfellow was this laughter in the woods character from Shakespeare and English mythology or English folklore. And then we were like, yeah, Robin works for a girl too. So it was it felt like it should have been there all along.
What I found amazing was that the dialogue didn't have to change much, you know, with the change of the gender, in that, like, we were thinking, okay, well, how would a young girl talk? As obviously the three of us were middle-aged men, so we were never little girls. But what was really surprising and is that, like, the dialogue didn't have to change. That, like, a child can be a child, like a girl can be a tomboy, and a boy can be like a little bit more feminine, and, you know, gender is quite fluid like that. And so we could just make Robin a girl, and suddenly a lot of the dialogue would just stay the exact same and would fit and would have more resonance.
Yeah, I mean, children making friends is just an absolute lawless zone, and I think I think Son of Rambo really captures that very well. And I think it actually was something that it still required a little bit of work, I think, when we were trying to get the first time we met Maeve. How do we get that line off? She's just playing with her. She's not kind of bullying her or whatever. And, you know, there were kind of difficulties there to sort of iron out. But Will, you alluded to something, to a darling you had to smother in the opening sequence. Do you want to speak about that a little bit?
Oh, it was that scene that I'd started writing on the flight back from the premiere from Song of the Sea. It was that kind of silent hunting sequence that we had where Robin and Bill are out in the woods, and it was I loved it because it was kind of demonstrated the relationship between the characters. But as we went along, as we developed the story, and Robin changed gender, all of a sudden it felt strange to start the story out in the woods, and we kind of we were always just forcing it. We were trying to figure out ways of having Robin out there, but she's been stuck by the campfire and Bill's out hunting. Yeah. Then they went into the town, and then they went back out again. Yeah. So it just felt natural just to kind of, you know, just start the story in the confines and the cage of the city.
But that came pretty late. With, like, we had storyboarded the kind of halfway house. I remember we started with a halfway house where Robin wasn't allowed outside a perimeter of that oak tree, where Bill had sort of said, there's traps, don't step beyond the traps. And I think it was Nora or someone who was just, we were late, like, we had an animatic of it and everything. And we had, I think it was the same with Secret of Kells. There was a journey that we loved where they were coming from England and hiding out in the forest. And there was a whole lot of character development between her and Bill being outlaws that we kept on trying to keep. And then in the end, we had to just go, okay, let's just simplify it down that she and Bill are in the city. We don't know for how long, but they're very much of the city. And the forest is completely new to her. She hasn't had a chance to experience and be out in the Irish forest at all. That's all long before. And so there was a lot of character development, even like moments where she tried on her mum's dress to go into the city. And it was like a connection between her and her mum. There was a lot of darlings there that were hard.
Yeah, and like I always loved the part that you boarded, Tom, where they go in and they meet the Lord Protector, and the Lord Protector has this big long table at the top of his chambers, and he puts Bill sitting down at one end and Robin sitting down at the other end to mutually separate them. And he goes walking around eating an apple with a knife, and he has this knife in his hand, and it's like really threatening. Yeah. And that was like, again, it was quite dark looking back on it now, but it had such drama and such suspense in it. And yeah, when we changed the first act, that had to go too. But yeah, there was really nice stuff there.
We had a little bit of English folklore in our folk music in the temp that we thought would be fun to start with, English folk tunes around Robin and Bill, and then move into Irish folk, you know, a lot of nice stuff there. But it was too long before we got Robin and Maeve together, and the focus was spending far too long on Bill and Lord Protector and Robin's relationship. And there was scenes where, I remember storyboarding, where Robin was literally outside the action. Like, Bill and Lord Protector were having a conversation, and Robin was listening to their thing. And we had to wrap it all back. And I mean, we had great consultants as well. Like, Will was on it for the long haul, but we had people like Jerica Cleland come in, and Darren Holmes, the editor, and lots of consultants who helped us get there and convince us that we needed to to smother babies and stuff. So it was an interesting, I would say, of the whole production and of the whole 3 movies, this is the one where we worked the hardest and longest on the story, and we're open to changes, even expensive changes like rewriting the first act, even after storyboards, more than any other project I directed or co-directed.
I feel like I have to step in for any of our participants who don't understand the kind of terms we're using there.
Oh, sorry, Mark.
No, but it's actually really interesting from a screenwriting point of view. So you have terms like "kill your darlings," "baby in the bathwater," smothering babies. All
I
of
hadn't
those things.
heard that one before. I think Tomm went very dark there.
Yeah.
What that means is when you have an idea, a little bit of an idea that you are so in love with, that can often be an alarm bell that maybe it's not actually going to fit. That you're so in love with it, and it's just this thing that it is by itself. And so it happens with scenes, it happens with characters, everything.
You're trying
like that.
to make it fit, you know.
Yeah, I think it might have been maybe the writer William Faulkner said to kill your darlings. I'm not totally sure, but maybe somebody like that would have said that was an important part of.
I will say I've gotten to the point.
I
will say I've gotten to the point because I kind of dove into being a filmmaker with only really like had been educated as an animator, you know, and I had young Irish filmmakers. I learned a lot there, and we had a little tiny bit of film theory in college, but not very much. And so a lot of this stuff I kind of felt like I learned along the way by reading books, and Ross and Will and myself did the Robert McKee story workshop and stuff. And something I really realized, and it's almost like a strange kind of masochistic thing, that there's a sense in me that at a certain point, when something seems big and hard and painful to consider, you might be on the right track. So many times through the learning process of making these movies, I kind of learned that yeah, it's almost a good sign that you're resistant, because you either have to fight for it and justify keeping it in, and that means you have to really think, why is it in there, and not just kind of be luxurious and let yourself have it just for fun. And if you can't defend it, there's really no reason to have it in the movie, because a movie's more like a haiku or a sonnet. Like, you've only got 90 minutes or 100 max, and you have to tell kind of a pretty efficient short story in that. And all those other nice ideas, there might just not be room for within that little thing. So,
and one thing we found as well is that, like, when we did like dramatically alter the story, and we had to throw out so much that, if, like, maybe by another draft or two on, we might be able to pluck some stuff out of the things that we dropped and bring some of those nicer things back in. So you're not getting rid of everything like completely a lot of the time.
I should just give a shout out to our story team, because I mentioned consultants like Jared and Darren, but we had a great story team, and some of the people who were storyboarding with us were like Louise, like an Oscar-nominated director in her own right, or Guillaume and Iker, who had a lot of experience in more like 3D action kind of movies and stuff. So we had people, Giovanna, so many people. I don't want to try and mention everyone because I'll forget someone, but a great story team, and they all brought
Mark as well,
of course,
and our
Richie,
editors too, like Dara
and
Richie. As you were saying yesterday, Tom, I think it was a really good point that an editor is like a director themselves, you know, and like Dara and Richie, made so many good calls, like even setting tone and like trimming things and cutting things, like it changes the story so much.
Well, let's talk about that actually.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I just want to say, because storyboarding is maybe something we should talk about here, because it's not as simple as the script gets written and then it's handed off and that's it. It gets boarded and we go. I mean, a lot of those things you're talking about, Tom, like that first act rewrite, you know, that was well into storyboarding as it was. So the storyboarders were really giving shape to this story as it was. Do you want to talk about boarding general, how you try to translate the screenplay into that?
I'm just going to skip back to some earlier slides to kind of show that this is something that I started doing on Kells, and then more on oh no, it's a video, isn't it, on Song of the Sea, working with Will and Ross and myself. Because we started out collaborative, this was going to be collaborative. We wanted it to be very collaborative. So there were sequences that we both storyboarded ourselves, but we were very open to the storyboard artists bringing something of themselves too, because we had such talent. So we would make these little brief notes, like where we were getting ready for the storyboard. We would kind of draw how we pictured it, but try not to overly dictate how it should be. and give little inspiration, little ideas, whatever reference a storyboarder would need. Right, so the blue writing there is our little kind of director's first thoughts on tone and what we kind of needed. And then we let storyboarders bring something to us and present it to us. And usually, you know, they took ownership, which was fantastic. And then they would come back with something. And then there would be another pass where we would sit with Richie, maybe Will, if he was around, maybe it was just Richie or Dara and myself and Ross, and maybe yourself, Mark. And it would be like a little sweatbox, because we'd see the storyboard that had been produced, and we'd have the script, and we'd had a whiteboard, and we would just be kind of almost brainstorming on the fly, and then come back out to the storyboard artists and invite them into the edit room and explain, you know, what we thought was working and what wasn't. So it was very collaborative, and it did feel like we had a lot of talented people. That was more like we were with storyboarders trying it all out first. We had this opportunity to kind of do certain versions of the movie, you know, in a fairly luxurious state, in black and white rough drawings, but fairly luxurious with a bit of music and, you know, rough dialogue. We could really try things out a lot before having to commit to the final structure of the sequence or think about how that sequence, you know, affected the rest of it. And I think it's something special about animation, because you can kind of edit and re-edit and rewrite a lot in the storyboard stage and try things out and find ways to make things visual at that point, and then go ahead and make the movie, rather than kind of go out and shoot a lot of coverage and hope that you have everything you need when you're right back into editing.
Yeah,
it is.
And I remember,
it's very
like Dara and Richie used to sometimes, so like in the edit suite, like cut out little characters using a little marquee tool and like move them down and flip them, and you know, they were almost like storyboarders themselves, like just like rearranging compositions, flipping like the axis.
Yes,
you know,
one innovation I want in technology is a way to draw better straight into editing software, because so many times there would just be a tweak of a panel that we need to do, and it was kind of a pain, because Richie or Dara or somebody or Darren would try and do it with the tools they had, but if we had a way to very quickly just draw over it, it would have been really nice. But it was very collaborative.
Sure.
Lots of hands, lots of iterations.
Around this time too, we were also developing like environments and locations. Like I remember one time, didn't we have like the town on the right and the forest on the left all the time? And it went on for ages and ages, and like we flipped the whole thing, which meant so many storyboards had to flip from east to west. But yeah, things like that.
But
like
that made sense, because by then we were starting to narrow down to the point that it wasn't about coming from England to Kilkenny, but it was like you were here and you were journeying out, and there's this like subconscious thing when you see it, that if you're journeying this way across the screen, it feels like you're going against the grain, and if you're going this way, it's easier. And we wanted it to be that this was nicer, it felt nicer. But
but there was contradictions in that though as well. I remember we had a big group chat about that.
And the other thing is, a lot of these guidelines and rules, when you're in the midst of it, there's something to hang on to when you're trying to make a decision, but ultimately there's the direction thing, but ultimately they're not mega important. It's just that you have all these little confines. It's like the meter in a poem or something. You need something to kind of say, okay, I'm on the right track, but you want to be as creative as possible and push against it as much as possible, rather than follow it like a formula.
Yeah, it's a good point. Will, maybe just this might be the last point now, because we want to open up to questions at 1:45. But Will, what is it like when you send off a script and we monkey around with it and butcher it to hell and send it back to you as a fairly scrappy animatic that we've changed around a lot, and we say, can you please fix this? Is that a combination of excitement and pain at once? What is it?
No, it's delightful. It's honestly, right, from my experience on with Song and WolfWalkers, always delightful, because usually, invariably, and nearly, I'd say 99% of the time, any of the stuff that comes back to me is always much better than I imagined. You know, the like, for instance, the specific example I can cite is the wolf vision thing. And I can't remember the genesis of the wolf vision. All I can remember is coming to that point in the script and going, maybe I should send an email. Okay, this is how I think maybe wolf vision would work. But I couldn't. I kind of gave suggestions in the screenplay. So, but it wasn't specific. I hadn't a frame in my head, if you know what I mean. When I'm writing, I generally write to cuts. I think I'm writing like an editor would write. I think editing and writing are very similar. You're writing in both processes. So I'm writing to cinematic cuts in my head, but I really and truly didn't know how the Wolf Vision would work. So I kind of threw it out there going with a kind of a emoji. I don't know, see what you can do. And when I saw that coming back, I just was blown away. I just went, wow, this is what it was much bolder than I imagined.
I think it was something Ross and I had been talking about from early on that we wanted to try, but we weren't sure how to do it. But you know what? I think that's just a teaser, because I think there'll be an upcoming talk that where they'll get into more detail about the process and coming up with how Wolf Vision.
But back to Mark's question though, I always found, Will, that you were so optimistic and never really showed, even if you were depressed about like having to rip up an entire draft and like start again. You always had like an enthusiasm and optimism about the next draft, which was delightful to work with. But I remember, like, I mean, your final draft was the 9th draft, wasn't it? There were nine drafts and many alterations in between. So
yeah,
like,
lost
every time that we kind of went back and was like, oh, it's just not working, we have to rewrite it, you were always like, okay, let's get started. You were always really enthusiastic, which was amazing.
It's a certain, I remember listening. Yeah, go on. Sorry, Will.
No, it was just, that's generally the process. Well, I suppose I was so excited about the project. If it was a project that, you know, I was going, oh God, this thing, I was genuinely, my excitement from the very first day that the lads sent me their one pager, I was going, this is going to be class. And so every time I had a chance to iterate, I knew we were going to make it better. Or, you know, I could be less polite. Yeah. So it was always, right, okay, let's make it better. We can make it 1 degree better. I bet if we had a chance now, we could go back and we could still make it better, guys. We could still do something.
It's done.
Okay, we did. We're on for a 10th draft then. Yeah?
I did want to just share. I did want to share one thing, Will, which is just one thing before we get to the questions. And I'm sure the people are mad to hear the questions. But I was listening to a podcast with another writer who's actually, she's working on another project in the studio, and she talked about how when she worked in Pixar, they brought in like a big fancy multiple award winning writer, and he left after a week because he said, I'm not generous enough as a writer to work here. I think you have to be a certain kind of writer to work in animation, where you're open to other people bringing stuff and you don't ultimately get to be the last say. You kind of are part of the team, and it's a very generous and it's very open hearted kind of position for a writer to come in and take on board all of this stuff and not just sort of go off and cry in the corner when they keep getting asked to rewrite it. So we're very lucky to have worked with it twice now.
Very good point. Okay, right. I think we'll have to wrap it up there. But we're going to have some audience questions. I think, Alan, do you have some of them you can put to us maybe?
Yes, I do. Quite a lot have come in. It's interesting. They've broken down between technical questions and skills and more personal feelings about how WolfWalkers and former movies have made people feel. Emily, for instance, Emily's an artist, and she's part of a collective of artists of the fan-made zines of Cartoon Saloon's current work and former. And I've seen it actually a lot in social media. I think they seem to be doing great stuff. But her question is, first of all, she's hoping that you like what you've seen with the fanzine work that's out there in social media. And she's also asking a particular question. What was WolfWalkers animated on? What was it done on the primary program? Or was it started on paper or on something else? She's quite interested in that.
Well, let's just make that a quick one. The animation is done in a program called TV Paint, and that's pretty much the majority of it. The backgrounds are done in Photoshop, assembled in Photoshop, but were produced with physical media. So lots of watercolor, lots of markers to produce the kind of backgrounds, and pencil work as well for the forests. But in terms of software, TV Paint is what we used for. I think we
should speak a little bit to the general audience what that means, because I think it sounds like the software does it. And I think the thing is, TV Paint is essentially paper and pencil just directly onto the screen. So you're drawing every frame per character at least 12 times a second. So the animators aren't using the computer to do any of the drawings. They're drawing just directly onto the screen as if they were drawing on like 12 sheets of paper. And even the Wolf Vision parts were all animated on, well, the final thing you see on screen was drawn on paper. So the whole ethos was, even if we use technology, that we wanted to keep a very hand-drawn look and a hand-drawn feel and hold that hand-drawn craft at the center of it. So just in case anybody has a misunderstanding about what that means, that it was done in that software, because that can sound a little bit more like another process than what we used.
We also then have a question from Eamon. He asks, do you think you might have a fourth movie in the series?
Not in this series. Not in this series. I think Tom himself were both aware that, like, after WolfWalkers, those 3 films working together, that would be the end of it. But that's not to say that either one of us or someone else in Cartoon Saloon might not do a film based on Irish folklore or Irish myths or legends. It might be for a different demographic. It might have different tone. It might be, you know, like vastly different. But these 3 kind of work together, and I think that's where we personally wanted to, you know, put a full stop, just because there's a danger that you might get known for only producing these films, and you might get pressured into only making these films. It's like an actor being typecasted playing a villain or playing a you know, a good guy or whatever. You want to be able to change and do different things.
Yeah, I would at least say it's time to pass on the baton. I think storytelling, especially folklore, is something that passes from generation to generation. I've spent 20 years now trying to get these things made, so I think it's time to, you know, I might look in different directions, but maybe a young director in the studio or elsewhere will take on the folklore. And what's lovely about the folklore, I think, is it can be totally interpreted. Like the themes that I drew out, or my co-directors Nora or Ross drew out, or the writers Will or Fabrice, they drew out the themes at the time that were speaking to them in the folklore. And maybe the next generation of animators will look at the same folklore and find themes that are relevant to them and tell new stories, you know.
Great. Lisa asks, do you have any, or did you use any art historical references? Some of the scenes looked almost like books of hours.
Oh, it's books of hours.
Well, we were influenced by lots of historical references. Like we mined through any available artwork of the 1600s, which was kind of few and far between, really, in terms of like Irish reference of woodcuts and lino cuts. We did come across some interesting things. Like they were almost used as propaganda for English people back home of what the Irish were up to and how wild they were and how like rebellious they were. But a lot of the reference of the woodcut style we came across were based in England. But there was just a beautiful visual aesthetic to it that perfectly fit this kind of cage-like, oppressive, aggressive town that we wanted to portray. But in terms of historical reference then too, there's a lot of like, you know, Civil War reenactments that we would look at for like the, you know, the soldiers apparel and like towns that exist over in Belgium and northern France and Germany with the same architecture that we could reference for the buildings. And, you know, like we would just mine a lot of photographic reference like that.
And then on the more personable side of things, how people were affected by the movie, Shannon said when she saw it, she saw parallels for the LGBT experience, particularly the lesbian experience in the characters, the young lesbian experience in the characters of Maeve and Robin. Were these undertones intentional? Because she felt it was very important to see that from a personal perspective.
Early on, Dara, one of the editors who worked with us, pointed out that we were veering into those themes, and like we didn't back away from them, but we didn't, like, it wasn't our story to tell. None of us have had that lived experience, so we said that's cool that it could be read that way. But that's the beautiful thing about folklore and metaphors and, you know, allegories, that usually these stories about transformation and friendship and connection from different points of view, there can be a reading. So I remember Dara giving us a full kind of quote unquote queer reading of the story while he was editing it, and we kind of said, wow, that's so interesting, it really works. That's fine, let's move on. Yeah. It can be about that, it could be about something else, you know. I
think that moment when Robin, you know, comes out and says like, I'm a wolf walker to her father, and her wolf form leaves her body, it like it can be an analogy for many different like personal journeys. Like for me, it was very much about like at that time when I was a young teenager and I knew I wanted to be an artist, and like I had to kind of go against you know, society or parental kind of advice, and really that time in your life where you know who you are and you have to follow that, or else you're kind of living, you know, a lie. So I think everyone can read into it, whether it's like you know, political or religious, like leaving your religion, or like changing political stance. You could read so many different analogies into it. So I think Tomm himself wanted to leave it ambiguous on purpose so that everyone could read their own personal story into it. But yeah, there is no getting around that. Like a lot of people have seen this connection between Robin and Maeve, almost like a first crush, and that's a valid reading of it. You know, Tomm himself didn't purposefully put that in there, but if people want to read that into it, then that's
I think it's a nice legacy of the gender swap. You know, I think there would always have felt like some kind of first crush thing between Brendan and Aisling, say. And when we swapped the gender, I think that didn't go away. So that's kind of a nice side effect.
Edmund has asked, do some of the characters as they develop exert an influence on the later stages of the storyboarding, in that their voice becomes as important as the animator?
Oh, the voice actors.
The actual development of the characters.
Oh, who they are. When we find who they are, what would they do? More in the storyboard. I think once you get to animation, you kind of know who your characters are, and you usually have a voice. And then the animators find little things that emphasize that, like Robin has a little head shake that we found early on, and we kept it every time she was kind of feeling like she couldn't get her ideas out fast enough. She would do this little head shake, and then we kept it even when she was a wolf. So those little things, you keep on looking for those as you start the sequence, and then you say, oh, let's do that again. Let's do that again. We did some acting workshops with John Morton, the local actor, and stuff about that. But in terms of the characters starting to speak for themselves, like Will, you can speak to that. That comes from the writing and the storyboarding. Right?
Yeah, it comes from connecting to, you know, just fleshing out the character in my head to be able to find their voice. So just basically, from my point of view, I just try and know the motivation of the character, what the character wants, and really try and flesh out their motivation for everything they're doing, and express that in through their dialogue, really, in their language. And then what I love about the character animation, I always adore seeing some of the performance decisions made by the character animators, because you can see little tweaks and little suggestions and little flourishes where you go, that's physical performance helps, like, make the character a little bit more three-dimensional, really. So yeah, it's a collaboration. Everything about this is a huge collaboration.
Definitely, once you've gotten the right performance from the voice actors, I think everyone references that a lot too. So they are a big part in that too.
Mm-hmm. And maybe, Will, staying on you, a particular question has come in from you as for what do you do, or how do you continue to develop and strengthen your writing skills?
Oh God, yeah, try and be better all the time, and learn from your mistakes. Really, that's it. We go through but the weird thing about it is every time I start a new story, it's always a blank page, and it's always an incredibly difficult thing, unless you get a situation where you have the lads coming to you with an idea for a story. Then that's great. That page has already got one page. That's getting to that one page is a huge thing. So every time I start a new project, it's always as terrifying as the last, and it never has gotten any easier. But from my experience of writing and having written a lot of drafts of a lot of different films, not a lot of different films, but you just learn the kind of like the I suppose you develop a set of tools to deal with problems that you've been down roads before, and you kind of went, actually, I can see where we're going to end up in trouble if we take this course. So basically, a lot of practice. That's what I would say. Is just keeping at it, doing it as every day if you can, and that's the main thing I would say.
And I see there's lots of questions we could have asked, but the time is against us. So maybe, Mark, I'll hand back to you for a final word.
I am muted. Yeah, cool. Okay, well, I really want to thank Tomm and Ross and Will for this. I know it was a little bit of a meandering conversation, but the fact is that's how stories like this come together, is by everybody just collaborating and working through everything. And I think this has actually been a particularly valuable talk because it let you see a lot of things that just won't be obvious on screen. So that's, we can always just go up and show you artwork from the movie that everybody's kind of watched, but it's nice to maybe get a little bit behind the scenes and talk about what was really, really hard about this. So I just wanted to say as well, there are loads more of these talks coming. There are maybe, Alan, 6 more or something like that.
There's a further 6 coming up next Wednesday with yourself, of course. And so all the creative team behind Cartoon Saloon will be coming on board to give us their perspectives like today. So people can just register on the Butler Gallery website for the sessions. And I would like to give a shout out at this stage to Animation Skillnet and Screen Skills Ireland, because they're really supportive all the programming we're doing around the exhibition. They're going to support our artist in residence, Gráinne Rose Fordham, who was the layout artist on the movie. So really a big thank you to them.
Yes, and thanks to Butler Gallery. Yeah, big thanks to Butler Gallery as well.
Thank you so much. I really just want to, one more time, I just really want to encourage people to go to the other talks if they can, especially if you're a student or an aspiring filmmaker or a young animator, because you're going to see a lot of people who are kind of on a certain trajectory in their career and maybe have some winding paths of how they got there to relay to you. So I think it could be, each one of them could be interesting in that way. So I think a lot of the
questions that we haven't gotten to today will be answered over the next few talks. So tune in next time.
Yeah, if you didn't get your question answered in this one, just post it for the next one.
Or it might be taken care of, yeah, in the following stuff. There's people asking about some more detailed things that I think will be covered coming up.
Exactly, we can do that. Thank you all very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
All right.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Good luck.